Well, thank you for having me to the AASM Foundation and SOAR. Again, I want to stress what Vanessa just brought up. Apply for the YERF. I cannot stress enough. I know Dr. Hensinger attended our previous YERF and is such an opportunity that I certainly wish I had when I was at the stage that you all are now, especially at the level of, NRSAs, K awards, trying to start your careers. The YERF is just incredible, and I can't stress it enough. And I am vice chair for the upcoming year as well, so I'm certainly trying to be a salesman here. So if you haven't considered it already, applications are coming up, so please dive in. So I know Dr. Busey is on the line today. He presented this last year, so I wasn't expecting that. I'm a little.
I'm just I'm checking on you, Tim. Yeah, no pressure.
Boy, yeah,
No pressure.
none at all. So hopefully it's all clear and we get the points across. One thing I do want to stress: let's make this interactive today. I do not want to sit here and bore you with a lecture about biosketches and K awards, et cetera, et cetera. I think this is really something to get really interactive and talk about things. That's part of the reason why we developed the worksheet. We don't necessarily need to go over all your answers on the worksheets. The point of the questions, the worksheets, I'm kind of giving away, the big finale, is that it's actually questions you need to ask yourself as you develop your biosketches and say, for instance, your background statements, et cetera, et cetera. But I'll point that out as we go through our presentation and discussion today. So let's get started. Candidate background and professional identity. I was really happy with this Microsoft Word clip art because it kind of it portrays a message I want to get across today, is that you're going to have to make yourself stand out. That's really the point of this here. That, I hate to say it, science is in a way a competition. That you're going against other individuals who are also very smart, who have very nice backgrounds and very good ideas for their science, and you really need to make yourself the exemplary, stellar candidate that someone should fund. That being, for instance, NIH. So get those hands up there and kind of get the spotlight on you. That's kind of the point of what we're talking about here. Okay, conflict. I do receive funding from Merck for a project of mine, but that has nothing to do with today, so we can just skip right over that. So learning objectives today. At the conclusion, we're going first, just have a more general talk about defining your professional identity, the idea of strategy, tactics, how to get to where you want to go. And then we're going to get more particular. Now, I received the draft biosketches from all the participants. I'll have a few observations about that and a few things to point out about biosketches. I did previously present at YERF on biosketches, but that was a whole hour, which I'm not going to fill here. I just thought a few points I could maybe bring up could be really important, especially about the statements that people make about themselves in their biosketches. And then lastly, the idea of the K awards and your candidate background, professional identity. How do you fill those 5 or 6 pages that you're going to be putting in with the K awards? Now, before moving on, I wanted to ask, I don't think everyone here is going for a K award. Is someone going for a R01, for instance, instead? Is everyone going for K awards right now?
I'll be going for an RA1 or equivalent.
Okay, great. Okay, well, Dr. Joyce, my apologies. It will be K award oriented, but hopefully some of it will still rub off on you, and one day you're going to be an excellent mentor and have to work with your mentees to develop K awards. So hopefully this will still be informative for you, this part of the discussion there. So okay, so I seem to remember my old mentor, Dr. McCarley. He always had this distinguishing point of the forest versus the trees. Okay, the forest is the big picture. What are we looking at in the big picture? So if we look at our worksheet, I believe that was, in fact, let me pull up the worksheet. I believe that was question 2, wasn't it? The idea of why are you here? Why have you picked science as your career? Why are you actually going to pursue what you want to pursue? And certainly, what in 20 years, where do you want to land? Okay, so that was kind of similar to the question that we have. Question 2, what are your eventual career objectives and goals? That's more long term. Now, what's important about that is certainly that you have to be succinct about it. Okay. And that's why I have at the bottom of this slide here, the elevator pitch under 2 minutes, which is, for instance, how we started URF this year, that we went around the room and everyone in 2 or 3 minutes had to sum up and tell you what they're about. This is great when you're speaking to people about at parties, for instance, but it's also really important, say, for instance, if you're at a meeting and all of a sudden you're talking to, say, a very important colleague or a PO or someone who's really important to what's going on in your career. So this is something that you should actually have kind of practice, and it shouldn't be too long either. That's why elevator pitches are usually 2 to 3 minutes. So just keep that in mind. So what should be in the elevator pitch should be your long-term plan. Okay. And how do you define your plan? Well, there's going to be career objectives. Where do you want to go with your career? And that can be, academic ladder climbing. I want to be a professor, et cetera, but can also be about your science itself. What is your eventual goal of your science? Do you want to cure this or treat this or investigate this? Something that you should have pinpointed there. Remember, it's big picture. And pretty much your summary of your research program is the long-term goal of my research program is. Now, this is also something that comes up pretty much as in your research statement, in your biosketch, is your first or second lines. Why are you here? Who you are and what do you want to do? So keep that in mind, because part of the point of this worksheet is you've already done this, because that's your answer to question number 2. Okay, so just keep that in mind. So we got a picture of the trees here. Let me get to the next slide if it wants to do this for me. My apologies. I've turned my worksheet up as well as, where are you? Come on. Okay, let me get to this and go to the next slide. Are we on to the next slide? Strategy? Does everyone see a slide that says strategy?
You're in the
Yes.
slides. Yeah, you're in the kind of slide creation mode though. So we have,
Okay, yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
you're not in
Going
slideshow.
to drive me crazy here today. Okay, then anyhow, okay, so my apologies. Okay, so strategy. So one of the strategies I don't have on this is certainly your research. How do you develop your research? Develop your program, build off of one finding to the next, et cetera, et cetera. But
Sorry,
there's a lot-
you're still in presenter mode.
All right, my apologies.
Third
Okay,
time's a
so
charm.
there you go. Okay, here we are.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's look at the strategy. So outside of what you want to do with your research, there's a lot of tricks out there. And these are the things that I think more senior investigators, a lot of them learn more by trial and error rather than having someone like, say, myself kind of get you to that point. And one thing maybe today I want to portray to you is that you're learning from my mistakes. Some of these things I can tell you I wasn't really aware were important at the time, or was too hesitant to do at the time. And it turns out in the long run, these are very important things that you really need to keep your eye on. Above the science, you can be the best scientist in the world, but if you don't have a way to play the system of sorts, being NIH funding, et cetera, you're going to have difficulty getting to the goal of, eventually having your laboratory survive, et cetera, et cetera. So training, this is something very important for the K awards that we're going to go over, that we're going to have to identify gaps in your training and how you should fix that so you can convince your NIH reviewers that you can get to your next step, which is going to be, I think everyone's goal here is to become an independent investigator. So building relationships with colleagues, senior and junior mentors, collaborations. This seems really important because, and this is one of the things I had to learn, is I can't do everything. Not everyone can do everything. So maybe it's more important to have a question you defined, and the way to get to that question may involve, for instance, multiple methods, not all of which you have, but you may collaborate with others to get to that point. And that's very important. And down the road, that is a way to maybe really land some funding. I mean, sometimes you'll have a gap in a grant, for instance, because you haven't published with this method. But if you bring a collaborator in with that method, or at least a consultation, something in that effect, that may be really helpful in the long run. So critical reading of the literature. I think you guys are already aware of it, but if not, there's great papers out there and there's not so great papers out there. And especially in your field, you have to be the individual who's eventually going to be able to identify the good and the bad projects. Okay. NIH program officers, conferences, and publications. So this is one of the things I was at fault of. I was putting a lot of grants in and never speaking to program officers, and it was a lot more difficult than I thought. I think when I finally maybe, started having some success of sorts was, maybe conversations with Michael Tweary, for instance, or, recently I'm working with Andrew Rossi at NIMH, et cetera, et cetera. But you have to have these conversations, and it's really difficult for some people because of their personalities, and you got to put yourself out there. Okay. And in particular at NIH, if you're going to be submitting to NIH, you want to be recognized by the PO that you're going to be working with a lot. They got to know your name. That's something that you're going to have to establish. And what I've learned is that POs are extremely open to talking to you, which was one of my hesitancies. I want to bug this important guy. NIH is running a study group that's, going to pretty much control my career for the 30 years, and it turns out these were really important conversations that I should have been pursuing even sooner than I ended up having them. So volunteering is very good too. Now, volunteering for K Award maybe is not as important, but I think career-wise is extremely important. Things like local teaching, for instance, at your institution. Some institutions, you don't necessarily have to teach if they're really big med schools, for instance, or something like that. It doesn't mean you shouldn't teach, though, in the sense that, that may help you with things like promotions in your career, involvement in certain types of societies is very important. So SRS, AASM, you should be volunteering if you can for different committees, getting involved in things like YURF and, SOAR and such. It's very important. Community outreach is really great. It's actually important and actually may really help you if you go. One thing I've learned about community outreach is it's great for you to hone how to communicate your work and the importance of your work and related things like, say, sleep medicine. That one of the best exercises I remember was for years, I was presenting on sleep to the 3rd grade of my daughter's elementary school. And it was such an excellent exercise to be able to gauge an audience and still be able to portray in an hour what you felt were important things to talk about. So it's a really great exercise beyond what else we're talking about today. So it's really a great exercise. And still to this day, a challenge of mine is to gauge an audience, bring what I'm trying to portray to that audience's level. It's still something to hone, I would say, on my end. Local committees I mentioned, reviewing and editing for journals is huge. Watch out on the journals, though. There are the predatory journals and such out there, and that's not going to help you too much being a reviewer or editor for them. But certainly if it's a journal that you're familiar with and you're asked to review something that is of your expertise, I would say, do your best to do some reviewing. And again, like I mentioned, national, international societies are very important. And then lastly, with put yourself out there, another thing I want to stress is when you go to meetings and you're put in certain situations, to put yourself in those spots. And it's tough. I walked into rooms sponsored by pharmaceutical companies where I know one person, and it's the person who invited me out of 100 people. And that person's going to be really busy, right? That person's got their own people that they have to deal with and talk with and all, but you still need to cross that threshold, get in there and start communicating. And this is where you go back to your 2-minute elevator pitch. Start the conversations going, find similar interests of the person you're talking to. And things can evolve from that, including up to the point of, grants and contracts. You never know. Okay, so we talked about the force, the big picture, but let's talk about things more specific. The trees, getting these grants, right? So one of the main things is to try to be as succinct and clear as possible in your communication. Okay, so define the short-term achievable objectives. Portray well your data analysis, be very specific about it, about your projects and your papers and such. Hone what you're doing to your specific research grant application that you're going for. Okay, that it's something that's important, for instance, not only for the research you're doing, but even your biosketch, that you really have to sculpt what you're going to propose to NIH specific to what you want to do in the proposal that you're putting in. So, define it very well. The aim of the proposed research study analysis is, okay. Grant application tactics. Okay, so this is one thing I think is really important too. We're all familiar with K awards, R awards. That's it, right? This is something as well that, no one ever sat me down and taught me per se, but through the years, I've kind of figured out is where do you find the opportunities, right? Where do you find something that is a good fit for your research, your proposals and all? So you got to learn about your funding agencies, okay? You got to learn their strategic plans. If NIMH is really pushing on suicidality, maybe I should be thinking about something I could do having to do with suicidality. Advisory groups are really important. Specific priorities of the different funding agencies. You need to be actually aware of these, okay? Learn about the specific grant mechanisms beyond just the R1, R21, K award. That's it. There's many mechanisms out there that would really surprise you, some of which that may be a perfect fit for something that you're interested in submitting. Study sections is a fun one. Okay. Study sections, how many conversations have I had with my colleagues and otherwise, like, who is this reviewer on this study section was reviewer 2 and said this, or whatever else. I mean, there's an art almost of gauging study sections and knowing when to submit proposals to certain study sections. And I hate to say it, but it's also an art to know study sections to avoid. Okay. And that's something that just you and the work you do with your colleagues and just knowing the field and whatever else, you'll get a sense of. Okay. So just really knowing your study sections is really important. Keep an eye on the FOAs, the RFAs, the program announcements, et cetera. You may have something that may end up landing as a perfect fit for you. I can tell you, for instance, I know someone who's very excited that, NIA has a release right now about sleep and addiction. And it's like, oh my gosh, that's the perfect fit for, what this person is doing in their work. So they have a specific mechanism that they're submitting their grant to now for that. So get to know the program officers. Like I mentioned, you gotta pick up the phone. You gotta make that first phone call, okay? Get to know to work with them, the National Center, et cetera. And then here's something I want to add too, is learn about grant opportunities outside of NIH, okay? So, and the two that come to mind, I'm at a VA facility. The VA has its own mechanism of grant funding. It's like having, of sorts, almost like another NIH. They have their own study group sections. They have their own, different types of grants, whatever else. So, there's another avenue if you want to work at a VA. If you work at the VA, you can get the VA grants if you get eligibility, and you can get NIH grants. So it's almost a bigger pool you can think of. DoD grants, very important to keep an eye on. CDRMP, I think, are the listings that you can receive very regularly, I believe. And it'll list, their specific interests that may fit what you're interested in. And then pharma. Certainly, if you're in the sleep medicine, pharma is something to keep in mind too. It's very important to know that, these discussions with, if you want to talk to Harmony, Jazz, Merck, whoever else, it usually starts, at least for me, at a conference. It really does. That, you start just, give that 3-minute spiel, start talking about interests, certain compounds that may be used for a certain type of sleep disease that you're interested in, et cetera. It gets the ball rolling. And one thing from personal experience that I like about working with pharma is it's not like the black box of NIH where you submit the grant and then you go and pray and then you check ERA Commons every other day for that score or any sort of update on it. It's much different. Pharma, they'll look at what you've proposed to them and they'll write you back and they'll actually work with you on it. They'll be like, we like this idea. We don't like this idea. Well, what about this? And it's actually more of a conversation, which is really interesting about it. It's actually a neat way to do it. Is it a better way to do it? Maybe. Who knows? The NIH way, those seems to be working for years for many. So, okay, finding grants. Okay, this is something else that I have to say I'm a little embarrassed of. I just learned of this, and this was at URF, and it's the listserv from NIH for sleep. So if you go to NIH listserv and just search sleep, 4 things come up here, and you can probably barely see them here. I can tell you some of these you can't get into. It goes right to username and password, right? So you can't get into them. But there's this one at the bottom, Sleep RFA here. I want to show you it. So this was something Michael Tweary brought up, and I looked into it and I was like, oh my gosh, why have I not been doing this? Once a month, they have a digest of pretty much everything that's kind of sleep related that you can be looking at for certain things like program announcements. So I think a great example here that kind of made me think, well, I think this is a good example for everyone here is the latest message, new FOIA right here. Notice of special interest, basic and translational research on circadian regulation of heart, lung, blood, and sleep disorders, R01. I think most everyone on this call could be applying for that right there, right? So this is something new, came up in this listserv and, gets the gears thinking about how can we go forward and maybe actually apply for that. Another source that I have used previously is grants.gov. So you use this search engine, put in something like, say, sleep, and it'll give up all the opportunities that are categorized and related to sleep. Now, one thing is, though, to keep in mind is the opportunity title quite often doesn't mention sleep per se. I mean, this first one does here, right? So we do have, a mention of sleep disorders here in the first one. But if we go down to the bottom here, and all of a sudden I'm at mood and psychosis symptoms during the menopause transition, sleep's not being mentioned. But if you're talking about symptoms, disorders, whatever else, there's something about sleep in there. So you should investigate further. And maybe in the more larger program announcement, they're looking at certain symptoms and interested in certain symptoms, like, say, for instance, sleep. So this is another source, grants.gov, to keep an eye on. Lastly is NIH Reporter. Now, this is a huge resource for a number of reasons. First off, it's great to know who's doing what out there, because the last thing you want to do is submit something at NIH that's already been funded, okay? And it's something that, usually when the infancy of writing grants, wherever else, I go looking in here and see, what are the similar themes and all. Also, I have some grants sometimes I'll put in that need a home. And what I mean by that is they aren't usual grants that just seem to fit NHLBI or NIA or NIMH per se. But this can be helpful here because you can look for grants similar to your grant and see where they landed and where they had successful funding. So that's something important to keep in mind too, okay? Okay, so that's about it for this first section. So I want to open up the floor right now. This was more just the idea of general professional identity, getting yourself out there, but also a bit of description of how to land where your proposal should fit when you submit to somewhere like NIH. So I want to open the floor right now. Now, I know particularly on your worksheet, questions 1 and questions 2 were question 1, I remember, is what do you plan to do in the next 3 to 5 years? And question 2 is your long-term goals. And I think, it's kind of clear why you're asked that is because you're always going to be asked that. So, okay, so I open the floor. Any questions or thoughts at this point?
I have a question.
Sure.
My name is Rebecca Cox.
Yeah,
Hi. So I appreciate what you're saying about connecting the program officers, and that's something I really haven't done. And I'm just wondering, how do you first break that ice? Like, do you literally just call them and introduce yourself? Like, what is the strategy there?
Email.
Okay.
You can find the email for every PO, and you literally cold call an email. And you have to remember, this isn't going to surprise them. This is their job. You are not the first to write them out of the blue saying, hey, do you have a little time? I'd like to, discuss, my proposal. And do you think it'd be appropriate and what your thoughts are? And it's very helpful. Sometimes your POs will tell you, don't do that. That's overly ambitious, or there's a lot of problems with that technique or those ideas and all. And it actually helps you hone in sometimes what not only can get the proposal past the reviewers, But you have to remember that next step, which is the agency itself has to like it. So this is a way that's something that the POs are particularly important for, is not only to get you through your study sections and get decent scores and whatever else, it's that final stage to get through, NIA, NHLBI, for them to really like it enough that they're going to fund you. So the PO is huge, partially, I think, for that communication to you of what's important to the agency.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I can't stress enough. Contact the POs. It was a mistake I made previously, and I've learned from my mistake.
So I want to add to that, because on that point, I was considering going for a K99 a year or two ago through the NEI. And I did that process. I've heard from many people like you that it's a great thing to do. And, so I sent an introductory email. I said, here's my specific aims. Can we talk about it? And kind of got a one sentence back saying, this seems fine. And was really off put by that, because I'd heard such good things about building a relationship with this. So have you ever come across that, Tim, or that was an outlier?
It feels more like an outlier. Now, I haven't always heard about good conversations with POs, as in people will pitch their ideas to POs and POs will shoot them down. I have heard of that before, but I've always heard, and usually the NIH POs are trying to portray to investigators that it's an open door policy, that this is a communication that should be two-way almost. Especially with the pandemic now, it's Zoom meetings. I've had a few Zoom meetings with POs before, et cetera. Especially, I found that helpful talking to the POs as you're climbing over multiple submissions. So, you don't get on this good submission, but the score is pretty good, but you got to get to that next level. What was said in the room? That's one thing that a PO can give you, is that, when they went over your grant, sure, you got your pink sheets. Well, actually, I should explain, pink sheets is an old school term for your critiques. I believe my old mentor told me that it used to be on pink paper. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Oh my gosh, I remember them.
Yeah, okay, then there you go. Yeah. When I was in grad school, I asked my mentor, he's like, oh,
That's
no, they
funny.
were pink sheets. And,
Yeah.
yeah. So they're
With
called
the
pink
no
sheets.
project required. Yeah.
Right. So the thing is, though, the POs in the room, when they actually discuss your grant, and there may be something lost on your pink sheets that they can tell you otherwise, that, overall, they were really excited. They just had this one sticking point. You really just need to address that one. Or it could be more like, well, general enthusiasm was, they didn't think it was that great of an idea. These are the types of communications that a PO, especially when you're climbing the process of multiple submissions, is very important. So. And Dr. Joyce, I'm surprised. I haven't experienced that myself. I've been told that's not how it works, but people are people, and I'm guessing maybe that's just how that one PO works. Then
So that's good to know, because I was surprised, and my PI here was surprised as well. So
no, I'm
just
surprised.
That's the exception.
Yeah, that definitely is an exception, I would say. So, anyone else? No? Okay. So we can move on to BioSketch. Okay, so all of you sent some drafts BioSketches to me. A few things, and this is more of a question to you guys, is I'm assuming when you put the BioSketch in, were you told in your personal statement to have a word limit on it? Because a few of them submitted to me had this 100-word limit, which I thought was unusual.
So those were for the SOAR program applications, what I provided to you, Dr. McKenna, but no, there was no word limit on there.
Okay, yes, I didn't see someone even wrote 100-word limit, and I'll show you in a minute. It's not a 100-word limit, that what they're looking for, certainly. So, okay, so what is your BioSketch? So it's your summary of your education and training. I think that you're familiar with. This second point, I think, is really important. And this is why you should never just rehash the same BioSketch over and over again. You have to prove to them you are the fit for the specific project. Okay, without a doubt, you have to, and especially in that personal statement, by the end of it, you got to be convincing them, I got the techniques, I got the mad skills, I'm the guy who, our lady, or whoever else who can do this. Okay, this is something that you really need to portray to them. Okay. Of course, they want to see your track history, though. So they want to see positions and honors. They want to see, your themes, as you know, with BioSketches, your themes of your research, references, publications that back it up, et cetera, and what overall are your contributions to science. Now, remember, it should be succinct. It should be 5 pages max. And I think, you guys are familiar with the structure A, B, C, and D for fellowship only now, which we'll go over in a second. What it is not, like I just mentioned, when someone asks you for a BioSketch, if you're investigator on their grant or you're putting multiple grants, do not use the same BioSketch every time. You should be thinking of it as this thing that is constantly evolving, which it does for certain things. For instance, I got a new paper. Well, I got to bring that into the BioSketch because it goes to this theme. I want to get the credit for that, but also that personal statement itself should evolve. And again, to define what your particular role in the submission is going to be. Yeah. We'll talk about science CV in a minute because that's something that kind of is related to that too. So, okay. So what it is, well, you got to do it, right? If you're going to do a submission at NIH, you got to have the BioSketch in there. Not just NIH, other agencies as well will be asking for BioSketches. So with the R series grants, keep in mind, unlike the K awards, you don't have an opportunity of 5 to 6 pages of giving your background and your proposed training, et cetera. This is it. This is pretty much it. This is your point to, I am the salesman with the cap on, and here's a beautiful car, and this is why you need to be in this car. This is your opportunity, so you got to do it well. Okay, now K awards, it gives you more opportunities, and NRSAs as well, give you more opportunities. So, remember, reviewers may not know. I've had reviewers that are, I'm guessing, a little removed from my field. So you really need to do a nice, succinct job and that little bit of opportunity to really sell yourself once again. And highlighting collaborations is very important. Now, it can hurt you if you don't do it well, is either don't portray at all to them why for the particular project you're going for it, as in playing a role in it, being investigator, principal investigator, et cetera. There may be a mismatch of training expertise that they may look out. And one thing about a BioSketch, and this is funny because I was just talking to someone down the hall, is this idea of goodwill. It's the idea that a reviewer wants to like you in a way, but if you do certain triggering things, they'll go in with a bad taste in their mouth before they go through the rest of your grant. And you got to keep that in mind, okay? So remember as well, there's a new version out recently, and I'm going to show you a few of those highlights because they apply directly what you're probably going to put in for your fellowships, okay? Okay, so for the non-fellowship, it used to have 4 sections. There used to be a D. That's gone now. So now this applies more to the R1 that Dr. Joyce is going to be putting in, et cetera. Always make sure you use the right form. So go look at that date up top. We got 2024 here, so we're in pretty good shape, right? Okay, there's a new section title. They added scientific appointments to B. Okay, so this is the one thing I did want to go over with you guys is the personal statement, okay? Because this is huge. Like I said, this is your point to shine, and this is your opportunity to do it. So you have to make sure you're well suited for the particular role, for the particular proposal. You have to highlight your experience and qualifications, explain your factors that may affect productivity. This is very important too. And so this example I'm showing you on the left is from NIH. This is their BioSketch example. It's a great length, by the way, too, but they did a great job here to include one line. During 2015, 2016, my career was disrupted due to family obligations. And then upon returning to the field, got back on track. I broke my back in 2013. I was not too, wasn't putting out too many papers and all for around a year. So I think once or twice I put that in the BioSketch, but then I had more publications and it kind of washed away and I didn't bring it in anymore. But this is really important. And this is your opportunity to do that, because one of the things is if you have really good reviewers, they actually can identify things like gaps in productivity, where all of a sudden, if you're putting out 2 papers a year and all of a sudden there's 2 to 3 years where there's no paper and there's a reason why, for instance, I broke my back or anything else. could be a maternity leave, anything else. This is your opportunity to maybe mention that. So keep that in mind. Just make it brief though. I mean, don't, have a War and Peace explanation of something, but a sentence or two I think is very appropriate. So something new about this personal statement section. We used to go in section D and list all our funding and recent funding that, we just completed, et cetera, et cetera. You bring it up here and it's a little different now. It's funding you want to highlight. Now, this is something that I'm still with my colleagues going back and forth on. Is this where you list all your funding, or is this where you list funding that's applicable to the proposal that you're putting in? And it matters on individuals. Some people may have like 7 or 8 grants that they're involved in. Do you list all 7 or 8, or you just list the top 3 or 4 that are really specific to the proposal? I think as long as you're around 3 or 4 at the high end, that's probably good for what you're listing for research. Now, the more senior investigators on the call may feel differently, but this seems to be the sense of what I'm getting with people filling out this new version of the BioSketch now. Listing up to 4 citations. This is something that should be constantly changing with your proposals, because these 4 papers may apply to the proposal you're doing now, but it may not apply to a proposal that you're going to be putting in 3 months from now. So make sure that your 4 citations are applicable to the personal statement, to the proposal that you're putting in. And then again, always be modifying this. Don't have this be this stagnant, static document. It should always be evolving. So okay, now if you're doing a fellowship like the K Awards, this is one thing that's come up that's a little different. Section D is now specific for the fellowships only, and it's just for grades, your scholastic performance. Okay, it is no longer where you list grants. So this is an example from the NIH website of what section D should look like for a fellowship. Okay, so that's pretty much your doctorate level classes that you've taken. Okay. So when I presented this to URF, a few questions came up and there was a lot of back and forth. And I also looked at the BioSketches that were sent, the 5 of you sent, and some of this came up. So I wanted to go over this with you because I actually reached out to NIH about it because I didn't have the right answer. So should abstracts for meetings be listed in section C? Okay, so you have your themes you're breaking down in section C. Should you put an abstract in there? This was a question brought up when I presented BioSketches to URF, and senior investigators who were on the call said, no, you shouldn't do that. But I wrote NIH about it instead because I wasn't so sure about it. So I don't know if you can read this. To whom it may concern, for career development awards, for example, Ks, is it appropriate to include abstracts or poster presentations in the BioSketch, particularly in section C? Then I asked about length of personal statement. Don't worry about that. Their answer, based on your description, it would be appropriate to include the names of abstracts and presentations that constitute your contributions to science. And then they give a link to, their more specific description. Now, what gets a little slippery coming up is this. What NIH says and what a reviewer thinks may not be the same thing, right? You may get a grumpy reviewer who maybe doesn't like these abstracts in there, although NIH is saying, especially for junior faculty, et cetera, that's probably appropriate. So that's something to keep in mind too. I think at least for K Awards, it would be appropriate. I feel it would be appropriate. I've asked some of my colleagues who regularly, are on study sections for career development awards, et cetera. They thought it was appropriate. One thing they said though, is you gotta make sure and clear that it doesn't seem slippery what you're doing. And what I mean by that is make sure that if you're listing that as one of your references in section C, make sure you write it's an abstract, it's a presentation at a meeting, et cetera, et cetera. And I know sometimes, say for instance with sleep or whatever else, you can go in there and it's sup 1 and slip that in there. I have a feeling you need to make it a little more clear at that point that that should be an abstract that's actually from a meeting, et cetera, et cetera. And the reason why as well is because you don't want to appear slippery to the reviewer, okay? You want to raise a red flag when they're only looking at your BioSketch before even diving into the rest of your proposal that they're reviewing. So, okay, Dr. Busey, I see you have a hand up.
Just a quick comment. Number one, there are extensive instructions for BioSketches online at NIH, and they address this. So you can always go to look that. I like the fact that there's actually some, feedback from, from NIH people that supports that. But generally speaking, for junior colleagues, having, being pressed for space is usually not an issue in an NIH BioSketch. So if you're going to include an abstract, there's nothing to keep you from saying, per NIH guidelines, numbers 1 and 3 are conference abstracts, so you can, to avoid the grumpy reviewer, you can kind of reach out and say, hey, grumpy reviewer, I know what you're thinking, but I'm right here.
That's a great point to say that, this is allowed by NIH, maybe you don't know it, but like you're
Right.
saying, here's our reference to it, and give the actual abstract titles and all. I think it's crucial actually for junior faculty because, 5 pages is a lot. Very few of you, if any of you should be filling quite 5 pages yet. But just the same, I think it's really important for them to know you're going out there, you're going to meetings, you're presenting your work, you're getting those abstracts out there or giving symposia talks, whatever else. I think it's important just to make sure it's really clear to them. So, and one other thing I want to point out is this is the email right here. I sent it and they got back to me around, I had to write them a second time, by the way, but they got back to me around a week later. So NIH did respond eventually to me with my questions. So now the other thing which is of interest is should papers in process, under preparation, or under review be listed in your BioSketch too? Now this is another thing that I can tell you at my level, being a little more senior, the answer is no. Okay, I've been told not to. Not saying it's necessarily the exact thing NIH is saying, but I've been told not to. Now, there is a trick around it. If you have a paper that you've submitted, maybe submit it to a preprint, like a bioRxiv, for me, for the type of work I do. That is allowed, and you can list the bioRxiv as in your actual BioSketch. For things to be in process, under preparation, I could fill an entire BioSketch with papers I have done that never get published. But that's where it's kind of like, well, it's not really peer reviewed, and a reviewer may be a little hesitant on what's being listed on that. Now, what I'm talking about is the references you're listing after your theme sections in C, but it's not the same as in your text. For your theme, you could maybe mention something that we did this work, which is now, under review, et cetera, et cetera. It's more, maybe you shouldn't give it as the actual reference. But this as well, this can be different in different subtypes of the field, et cetera, et cetera. It's something to talk to your mentor and colleagues about. What have they done, certainly when they were junior investigators, et cetera, et cetera. And again, a way around it that certainly we've been using is the preprints, the bioRxiv, where all of a sudden, hey, it looks like we've been, we have a paper almost out there. We just got to get through a full peer review. So, okay, so let's go through the BioSketch summary. Got to make it personal. Got to change it every time you have a submission. It's an opportunity to tell the reviewers about you, your career, your expertise. I can't stress enough, seek the examples and advice from others, especially at certain levels of what you're submitting. If you're submitting a K award, go find some other individuals who put in K awards and see what they did and get some input from them as well, but as well as with your mentors, supervisors, etc. The idea is you're trying to help the reviewers. I love how Dr. Redline always brings up, you have to imagine your reviewer is up at 2 a.m. and they're at, say, grant number 4 of 12 they have to get to that night. So you have to make it as easy as possible, clear and succinct as possible for the reviewers, that you're the most qualified individual to be doing the work that you're talking about. Keep in mind that NIH tells this to reviewers that don't expect BioSketches that are chock full 5 pages, et cetera, from junior investigators. So don't feel that pressure necessarily. Don't go that route of filling it too much and then, being a lot of fluff and not being so succinct and all that itself can get a bad response from reviewers. Favor the clarity over the detail and the jargon. Remember, not everyone is specific to your field. If I go in there, I start talking about EPSPs, glutamatergic cortical neurons, et cetera, well, I got to back up why is that important, et cetera, before I get to that point. And then one other thing is, if you haven't already, you got to set up my bibliography. Okay. And this is the one hyperlink that you are allowed to have in your BioSketch. You are not supposed to have other hyperlinks in your BioSketch. I did notice in a number of the BioSketches sent to me, there were hyperlinks. So keep that in mind that it's a rule, I believe. You're allowed one hyperlink into my bibliography that you set up in CBI. Okay. And then if you haven't already, look into Science CV. This is kind of the way to go. So this is pretty much a form that you pre-fill with the information that creates your BioSketch. And it's great because pretty much once you do Science CV, it saves it for you. And you can use the clone of the last one you filled out and churn out a BioSketch, make your changes, save that one, you get your new BioSketch, et cetera, et cetera. And it's something that I just adopted in the last year, but already I'm realizing, this does make it, a little cleaner of exercise when I have to churn out a new BioSketch because I'm an investigator gear or whatever else. So, and it's cool as well because it pulls your information from ERA Commons, especially as you advance in your career. So, okay, stop point here. I see Dr. Hinziger has her hand up, so please.
Hi, it's nice to see you again.
Yeah, it's great.
I had a question. So if you were to cite a preprint paper in your BioSketch or otherwise, once it's published, you wouldn't like also cite the publication, right? You would then remove the preprint citation and add the, okay.
Exactly. Nope, definitely. Once you actually have the full real peer review publication out there, get rid of the old reference that goes to bioRxiv or whatever preprint that you're doing. So
okay.
Okay, so any other questions about the BioSketches right now? No? Okay, so I mean, for sake of time, I'm gonna move on. I mean, we could go a little more over the worksheets. Maybe we can do that at the ending. So I mean, pretty much questions 3 through 5 of your worksheet were just things for you to fill out because they're things that are going into your BioSketch. So just keep that in mind that you're actually answering and bolstering your BioSketch, answering those questions and making sure that certain things are addressed. Okay. Now, again, my apologies, Dr. Joyce. We're going a little more K award here, but you're going to one day have many mentees and you're going to really need to be aware about all this. Okay. And so let's talk about the actual candidate background and proposal that you have of the candidate section for the K awards. So 4 things that they're kind of reviewers are going to be looking for are they're going to be looking at you as a candidate. They're going to look at your research plan, the science, what you're asking. Do you get to point B from point A? They're going to look at your team. Okay, this is your mentors, your co-mentor, consulting, collaborators. This is something that I learned was very important, that if you don't have a communication with your mentor before going into your K award, this is something that good reviewers can kind of identify, that this looks like more the candidate developed all this and the mentor maybe wasn't as involved in it. So it is something to keep in mind that communication with your mentor is going to be key for the development of this section. And then environment and institutional commitment to the candidate. So, there's physical aspects of that. Do they have the lab space to do this, et cetera, but also commitment from your institution itself, that they're going to be able to support you having office space, lab space, in the work that you're going to want to do. And as well, what you're going to be doing as of sorts of trainee, that there are opportunities to be a trainee and to learn new things at the institution that you're at. Okay, so this candidate section, it turns out, is in 3 subsections. Now, okay, before moving on, who here has looked at the candidate background section and who here has started working on one? So anyone here ever looked or attempted to take a stab at the candidate section of the K award yet? Oh, good. When you're ready to dive in. So hopefully this is somewhat informative. So they're going to ask for, the candidate section is in 3 subsections. There's a candidate's background, career goals and objectives, and your plan for career development and training activities during the award period. Okay, so 3 different sections. Kind of where you were, where you're at and what to do with the proposal, and how you're going to get there with further training. Okay. Now, it's kind of vague. What NIH tells you is between your candidate section and your research strategy, you get 12 pages. Okay. So it's really up to you what you want to do. Now, what I've seen a lot, not saying you have to do it, is 5 and 7. That seems to be one that I've seen quite often, certainly in our laboratory. It seems like more of like a 5 candidate sections, 7-page research, but it doesn't have to be. It could be 6 or 6, I guess. So, and then one trick, and my administrator has more than once told our laboratory folk this, is it's kind of tricky, and I have it right here. You're going to upload them as 2 separate documents, but they're going to be kind of pinned together. So make sure if you're 5 and 7, you fill your 5 pages to the end of page 5, and then you go to page 7, and it's going to be pinned together. Okay. If there's an overlap like 5.5, 6.5, et cetera, you're going to have a few problems. So just it's easiest just to have a cut point at the end of the page for what you're going to be doing of each of the 2 sections. So keep that in mind. Okay, so you as a candidate, first thing they're going to look at is your background, your career goals and objectives, this plan, your career development. And one thing as well, and this is just for all grants you ever submit, is really understand the grant announcement and the RFA so you don't miss anything, because you don't want something kind of kicked to the curb because you didn't catch that thing that was important. Okay. Now, the NIH instructions for the candidate's background is describe the past scientific history, indicating how the award fits into past and future research development, career development, and then if there's themes, and this is something that is tricky too. Do you have overall themes that you're going through with this research that you're proposing to do, or what you're doing with your career? And this goes back to simple summaries of, your immediate plan with your research as well as your long-term goals. Now, if your work has changed, you need to be explaining that as well. Now, I can tell you certainly with more junior faculty, you may be doing a new steer. You maybe have one thing under your belt and you want to build off of that, but maybe new techniques, et cetera, et cetera. This is where you're going to be explaining that. Okay, so you want to describe your commitment to healthcare research, which is more general statements. Professional responsibilities, it's very good to be listing. For instance, it's always good if you're an animal research like myself to be on the IACUC, but if you're a human researcher, you got R&D committees, RB committees locally, very good that you're, involved in that. Prior training, you got to make it clear where you are up to the point that you're submitting, your research efforts up to this point, and your potential to develop as an independent investigator. And this is kind of linked to what's below that. There are brilliant people out there who aren't organized and can't pull it off. Okay, and this is something they're watching out for. They want to see it beyond just being the scientist with the brilliant ideas and even pulling off experiments brilliantly. That's not the same of what is kind of becoming a lab manager, that you're able to get from point A to point D every step of the process, which involves much more, it turns out, than just straight science. And it's at times a headache. I can tell you, for not only at your level, but it's always the headache, everything from admin or dealing with NIH, et cetera, et cetera. So they want you to appear to not only be a scientist, but someone who can execute. Okay. So these are the 2 things they're going to ask for. Describe a systematic plan that shows a logical progression from prior research and training to the research and career development experiences that will occur during the career award period, and then to independent investigator status. And you have to justify the need for career development to become an independent investigator. And that's going to become huge. And we'll talk about that in a bit. Okay. Now, when you talk about career development, and we'll talk about, didactics that you're going to propose and, meetings, et cetera, there are certain things you need to keep in mind. Okay. Things that they're going to be watching for, things like data management, things like, ethics. One thing that they're really going to watch for is statistics. Okay. So I think one key thing, if you're going for a K award, is if you don't have strong enough statistics, and I'm not just talking about undergrad stats or even some stats in grad school, you may need to take a higher level statistical course that's specific for, more advanced, techniques that you may be proposing. So keep that in mind. And then the ethics, certainly if you're doing human trials, clinical trials, but certainly animal work as well. We have ethics courses as well that we take. So if you're talking about your logical profession, I kind of took some of these statements from Dr. Busey's old slides from last year. These are just introduction to the section sentences. You know, as an undergrad, I first did this, then I decided to apply for grad school, worked on these projects, pursued a postdoc, et cetera, et cetera. Now I plan. So on the left is kind of getting to the point where you are kind of right now to go from postdoc to investigator, right? So, you know, bring up the research themes that you've had up to this point, which you kind of have already in your bio sketch, and kind of rewrite that. Your first theme, starting this point where it is, kind of describe the history, the progression of the themes, and then you work from there. Okay. Now, the second thing is what's going to be under the grantee period. Okay, so you get the funding. What are you going to be doing outside of the science as well as in the science? Okay, so career development is what we're talking about here. So you have your goals and objectives. So the goals tell you where you want to go and the objectives tell you how to get there. Okay, so your goals kind of going back to, you know, the big picture, the forest, the idea of wide range general goals, the idea of, you know, to have, you know, advanced level expertise. You want to be that expert, the person who, if you're looking at a certain aspect of sleep physiology, well, you're the one everyone's going to want to pick up the phone and ask about because you're the pro at it. You're the expert. Okay. As well, strategy. That's important. And that can be tough. How do you get from your great ideas and maybe a little bit of PD that you have on paper to actually the point of eventually publishing and getting that work out there? So objectives, kind of define them, make them feasible, kind of doable. Don't shoot for the moon ambition wise, which is one of the chief things that get dinged in NRSAs and K awards, and what I understand is over ambitious. Make sure things are concrete, specific, precise, succinct. And we'll talk about SMART and tactics in a minute, okay? So this was something interesting from NINS I found, and I wasn't as familiar with it, but it's called the gap-based approach. So when you're developing your career proposal, this career development proposal, what you need to do is you actually, and this is why I had you do the worksheet, these particular questions. You have to go through and identify your existing training and expertise, what you're good at now, and then you got to identify what's missing. And that's kind of tough. You got to kind of ding yourself like, oh, well, you know, I'm not that good at genetics. Maybe I should take an advanced genetics course here or an advanced course on microscopy here or whatever else. The idea is that you actually have to be identifying these gaps. And you also have to sell that if you're addressing these gaps, that it applies to what you're proposing to. Okay, this has to be relevant. You know, I can't go out there and shoot from the moon and have any old, you know, neat project at Woods Hole or whatever, you know, get all really wrapped up in something that isn't applicable to what I'm really doing. Okay, so this is the thing, is you have to clearly communicate what you got and what you still need. Okay, now sometimes you don't need courses. Okay, so don't go proposing courses just to fill the page. Make sure that you can sell why you need these particular courses to address the gaps. Okay.
Dr. McKenna, I just want to let you know that we're at time. And I know you
no.
have a couple more slides. So I can leave this open, but I just want to give you a heads up that.
Oh, no, thank you very much. Yeah, so I'm getting towards the end. One thing mainly is candidate and mentor communication, like I mentioned, is huge, and reviewers look out for that. They can get a sense of a mentor being more or less involved in the development of the career development plan that we're seeing here. Okay. Here I have the timeline is helpful. I think it's kind of crucial. I would say definitely have a timeline in your career development plan. Didactic, we kind of just went over that. Things are necessary for you to achieve your goals. Why do I need this advanced statistics course? Well, when I go publish this, I'm going to need to know how to program R and do mixed model de novas, and what if I'm missing ends? And you have to portray this, okay? Now, describe the professional responsibilities activities as well. That's very important for just, you know, your involvement in the field among colleagues, getting involved in different types of societies in your local institution, et cetera, okay? Then right here, I just wanted to mention the timeline. So the idea is it's 3 to 5 training objectives. The methods, list your courses, your didactics of seminars, your research, your papers, consultant visits, scientific meetings, and give really succinct timelines, what you're going to be doing at this time point in the 4 years of what you're proposing, okay? And SMART was this acronym I brought up earlier, just means specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. Okay, so when you develop your timeline, you're proposing what you're doing for your career and your development, make sure that SMART applies, okay? So avoid the common errors, unnecessary activities we mentioned, irrelevant activities, taking courses that are too introductory or too advanced, make sure it's really applicable what you're doing. And then don't, steer off on a tangent of something that really isn't applicable. And then the last slide, okay? So remember that your program that you're proposing is not only to answer a scientific question, but it's to get your career to the next step, okay? And it's good to be truthful almost in this candidate background and knock yourself a little bit. Not in the sense of like, I stink at statistics per se, but to notify that, oh, I realize I need more advanced statistics to eventually get to the point of like, proposals on advanced EEG power spectral analysis, right? So you have to evaluate yourself, propose that plan, and make it as crystal clear as possible. And that combined with a strong research plan is going to get your reviewers excited. Now, if it's not succinct and the reviewer's up at 2 in the morning looking at this thing and they're like, what in the world is this person talking about? Your enthusiasm for the application is going to be affected, maybe. We don't want this. We want everyone to get funded, right? So, and then lastly, get the advice from, your mentors, other people in your department, other people in the field, especially people applying for the level of the grant, certainly a K award if you're at that level right now, okay? Please feel free, just write me an email if you want me to look at a BioSketch or you have a question or whatever else. I'm not saying I have all the answers, but I can give you, maybe some thoughts. I can steer you to the right resources, et cetera, et cetera. So, okay, so I'm going to open it up for any questions now. So that was my spiel, and I hope it was clear and succinct.
Thank you so much, Dr. McKenna. I feel like this could be like a full 90-minute presentation.
Oh, good.
You have so many
Okay.
golden nuggets of information. But I'll open it up to everyone. Any questions before we adjourn?
How soon is everyone applying for K awards in R? So I'm guessing Dr. Joyce, you've put R in or going too soon?
So I'm in a weird position where I'm going back to Australia. So I will be putting in an equivalent to an R. I think they're due around May next year.
Okay. And then the other trainees are K awards. Excellent. So was everything clear? I mean, I think what it is spend a little time just reading over the NIH description of the candidate background, because I think between what I presented today and then seeing the more terse actual app, description by NIH of it, like you can pull back and go, oh, that's what Dr. McKenna was talking about. What, they're saying in 4 sentences is just, make sure it's clear and get the point across,
So can you comment, anecdotally, do grants not become successful because of weak, BioSketches, for example? Is that common?
Grants can be unsuccessful for a million different things through the years, I've learned. I have seen for career development grants, the 2 main things, and senior investigators on the call can speak in, are over ambition and not clear career development plans, and me included. I would say my NRSA early on, which I didn't get in the first round, those were my 2 dings, and since then, at least for development grants, that's what I've seen. More senior grants, like say a R01, it's hard to say directly, like that BioSketch is the reason why this got a bad score for investigator, for instance, but you have to think of it more as an opportunity to fight against that you're selling yourself, and this is your one window of opportunity to sell that car. And if you don't take advantage of the BioSketch, especially for the more advanced R's and whatever else, you're really doing yourself a disservice. So, but I haven't heard directly like bad BioSketch, no funding for per se, but I've seen investigators get dinged before because maybe it wasn't clear to reviewers that they had the expertise that was needed to play the role on the grant. So I guess in a way, yeah.
Great, thank
Dr.
you.
McKenna, I do have to hop off. I have to chair another meeting. So
Okay, Vanessa.
I'll leave this open for everyone to discuss if you want to spend more time. And
Sure,
obviously
sure. No,
everyone
no,
else.
I'm more time. I love
right.
chatting about. So, okay, Dr. Coles?
Thank you. That was a really nice summary. A lot of the things you said are things that we think about. I just wanted to reiterate, probably, I think one of the most important things is talking to your program officer. And I think that's the one people are most hesitant to do, but it's really their job to help you. And the majority of them really enjoyed doing it.
Mhm.
You said, somebody said, well, did you, Daniel, that you got that email back or that note back? I would have said, just me, I would have written back and say, great, thank you. Like, could I send you like a one-page summary or like, I would just assume they want to help you and kind of like, you know, you can write back and say, thanks for the reply. Could we talk on the phone sometime? Or, you know, wouldn't be too pushy, but they can be really helpful. They are the middle between the scientific review and the institute priorities. So, you know, I've had ones that were grumpy and I just like kept getting them to give me feedback and let them be grumpy. That makes sense. So I think
yeah.
the input from them is really helpful.
Yeah, I think it's huge. I think it's how you get, you got to remember the funding rates. We're looking at 15%,
Yeah.
20% here. And you got to get to that 15 or 20%. It's usually not in your first submission. To get
Right.
to that percentage, it's so key, that conversation with the PO, to know what's going on in the room. What are the reviewers really thinking, et cetera, et cetera. And
Right.
notice, this has nothing to do with science.
Right.
Okay. And that's the thing,
Right.
as you become an investigator on your own, independent, a lot of this doesn't have to do with science, it has to do with being a salesman in a way. So keep that in mind.
Yeah.
Dr. Cox. And thank you, Dr. Cole. Great input. Dr. Cox?
So I guess what I'm kind of struggling with in this candidate statement is it seems like you have to say how great you are, but also say how not great you are at the same time. And so I'm wondering, just like, do you have kind of a rule of thumb on that balance? Like, it should be like 70% I'm really great and ready for this, and 30% but I'm not. I mean, how do you balance that?
Well, the thing is you have to justify your gaps, as in you have to define what your gaps are and why they need to be filled for you to reach that next level, you know, to reach the level of career development you want. That may matter on the individual, what those gaps are. You know, if you're someone who isn't, you know, staying pretty much your theme is the same, there's not too much outside of it, that, you know, your training up to this point got you pretty much to where you're at. It's so hard to say 70-30 for, you know, percentage or wherever else. I think it really matters on the individual. I think what's more important is identifying the gaps and how you think you can successfully address the gaps with didactic, et cetera, et cetera. And that may kind of that may inform you. Okay. Now, one thing is, don't put yourself down just the same as you identify gaps. Don't say, I stink, I didn't take advanced statistics for blah, blah. No. Just say, I did this. I realize for this technique that I'm going to have in my proposal, I need this in addition, and I propose to fulfill the training with these means, is what I would say. So it's really hard to say 70-30. Now, I think there may be some K Award examples online, but one thing I would say is find colleagues, find peers, et cetera, who have had successful K Awards, because this is a huge part of it. And maybe that would, you know, kind of reflect to you, oh, this is what I should do about it. And what's great is if it's peers that kind of do something you do, in particular, more specific to your expertise, what you're doing, that may be very informative as well. Like, what types of classes I should be taking, what things should I be addressing? Okay, anyone else? Okay. Well, just keep in mind, I'm an email away. And certainly, if you just want to send a quick personal statement or, have just a little question here or whatever else, please write me at any point. And then lastly, I want to sell one more time the YERF. I know Dr. Hinzinger attended previously, and maybe she could back me up. But I think it was an incredible time, and it really is an opportunity. It's around 3 days of what I just went over with you. Okay, there's a day of POs in the room. You want to start your conversations with your POs, you go to YERF, and you're doing one-on-one at a table with them. It really is an incredible opportunity, which I can say when I was, a few years ago, let's just say, when I was a junior faculty, I would have really appreciated, because I think that would have pushed me into talking to the POs. Like Dr. Cole said, you got to start these conversations with the POs. It really is so important, it seems. So, okay. So anything else from anyone? Okay, well, reach out if there's any questions. And thank you so much, everyone, today for listening.